Welcome to Mackinac Island Moments, hosted by lifelong Islander Jason St. Ange. Through conversations and interviews with fellow island locals and residents, Jason will bring you the real stories and characters that define life on the island. Whether you're a seasoned visitor, new to Mackinac Island, or even an islander yourself, you'll be sure to learn firsthand about the island with Jason on Mackinac Island Moments.
Hi, and welcome to the second episode of the Mackinac Island Moments Podcast. I'm Jason St. Ange, coming to you from Mackinac Island. I first want to thank all our listeners from the inaugural podcast, and of course acknowledge our sponsor for this podcast, which is the Mackinac Island Tourism Bureau. Your trip begins at MackinacIsland.org. Today's episode, folks, I'm simply calling the blues, and I'll tell you what, I have the blues on Mackinac Island. The weather has been horrible. And horrible, I mean that it's been balmy and mild and void of all winter characteristics. I like winter. I've mentioned that in the previous podcast, and you've heard me say that. I like winter better than summer, and I do. But what we're experiencing is not winter. When the lake has so much open water like it does right now, the temperatures come up and you get fog. And let me tell you, we are getting the fog. Today it wasn't as foggy. It actually lifted for the first time in several days. I haven't seen the sun in days. These are the times when it's not so fun to live here in the winter. But as I've always said, when the chips are down and you start second guessing your decision about living on Mackinac Island, I have a little thing I do. I always think that there are literally hundreds of thousands of people who save their time and their money just to spend a weekend or an afternoon here, and I get to be here every day. And that said, I guess we'll take a little fog when the fog rolls. Anyway, I'm calling this episode The Blues, not just because of my weather-induced mental state, but also because I'm going to talk about the famous rare blue ice, and I'm going to dispel that myth. And then I'm going to talk about Grand Hotel's blue ceiling. I'm going to myth bust that one. And finally, we're going to have our first guest on the podcast, the top man in blue on Mackinac Island, the chief of Mackinac Island Police Department, Doug Topolski. This is definitely going to be a blue episode. So let's talk about blue ice, or rare blue ice. Some of you may have picked up on the locals laughing about all the fuss about blue ice. Rare blue ice. Full disclosure, I happen to think blue ice is cool. I think it's pretty. I even stop and photograph it on occasion. I always like to see it. That said, what makes it funny? What makes it funny is it's not rare. It appears every year. I can't think of a time we didn't see it. It's merely caused by pieces of ice when they push up and stack on each other, and a little snow on it, and the light refracts, and there's some light bluish tint to it. But what ended up happening is some marketing genius on the mainland, and that's what I'm going to call him because he came up with this, some marketing genius on the mainland added the word rare to it, and it took off. And what's funny about it is it's not rare. It's not even, it's yearly. Some years it runs the entire western shore of the island. Some years it runs the eastern shore. Some years it's all over the place. It's a half mile offshore. Sometimes it's a mile offshore, or it's all over the ice as you go across. I always tell people, if you think it's so rare, go cut off a piece, take it home, and put it in your freezer. Unfortunately, once you cut it off and bring it inside, it's not blue anymore. It's not refracting that light correctly, so it won't be blue. Even MLive got into it with a recent article that stated it doesn't happen every year. Yes, it does. I'm guessing most folks who live on the Great Lakes, or at least the upper Great Lakes, have been shaking their heads about this new manufactured phenomenon. So, is it cool? Yes. Is it fun to see? Absolutely. But it's not rare, or a phenomenon, at least not to us. I'll tell you what's rare. The sun has been rare the last 10 days to 2 weeks, but I believe I've covered that. So hopefully folks will stop flocking across the state and across the country and seeing it all over national news when a little blue ice rears its head. But I guess that's why they call it the media, huh? Okay, on to blue ceilings. A whole bunch of you, including a lot of tour drivers, aren't going to like this one. Why is the ceiling of the Grand Hotel blue? I know. It keeps the birds away. Birds don't like a blue ceiling. It tricks the birds into believing it's the sky so they won't roost, and now it even tricks bugs too. Okay, folks, you ready for this? The reason the ceiling of the Grand Hotel is blue? The porch, right? It's because around 1985 or 1986, during a major renovation, the hotel decorator Carlton Varney of the New York decorating firm Dorothy Draper, he looked up at the ceiling and said, "Paint that ceiling blue. It'll look nicer." In fact, Carlton, who recently passed, he used to call it Jefferson blue, but it's actually Pittsburgh paint color Dukiss. Dewkiss, Dukiss. Yes, I'm aware that lately some paint companies have come out with their own color called Mackinac Porch Blue or something of the sort. But trust me, folks, I painted that ceiling a half a dozen times. It's Dukiss by Pittsburgh Paint. I know. Yeah, but we were told, no, a blue ceiling won't keep the birds or bugs away. Is there some down south tradition about haint blue and bad spirits or some malarkey or something like that? Maybe, I don't know. This isn't the deep south, and I don't know anything about that. But why aren't there any birds on the ceiling of the Grand Hotel? And I'll tell you, and I speak from experience, as my company spent 15 years doing all the painting and wallpaper for Grand Hotel. The reason there aren't any birds is twofold. First, every year, a product called Roost Off is applied to every ledge, every sprinkler pipe, and crevasse that a bird might consider landing on and taking roost. This product comes in a caulking tube style cartridge, and you use a caulking gun and you apply it just like you would caulking. It has the consistency of liquid fly paper or really thick syrup, maybe toothpaste. It's about as thick as toothpaste. It's clear, and so you don't see it. And when a bird lands on it, they feel the stickiness on their feet, and they immediately leave. The other bird prevention device is on the front of the hotel, and it runs from pillar to pillar. You can't really see it, or maybe you have, but the hotel maintenance department runs fishing line. They run it from pillar to pillar, and they run several rows of it, probably about six or eight rows of it. A lot of restaurants do the same thing that have open air seating or patio seating. They run it across the top so the seagulls don't bombard you. When the hotel is having those functions, those weddings and those cocktail parties, you can't have birds above you doing what birds above you tend to do, if you know what I mean. So they take great care and interest in preventing birds from hanging out on the porch. So I know you heard it on a carriage tour, or you heard someone else talk about it, or you read it on Facebook, so it must be true. But listen, the reason the porch is blue is because the decorator said to paint it blue. One time I was standing next to Carlton, and he looked at some of the balconies on the front of the porch, and he said the bottom of those should be Jefferson blue as well. And just like that, we turned them Jefferson blue. So, it was funny when I was still working there, I used to get calls. And always, I'd be on the fourth floor on the far west end, and it would come over the work radio, Jason St. Ange, you have a call in maintenance. And, oh, geez, it's about a 5 to 10 minute walk. I used to call it a 2.5 hour drive to go from the west top floor all the way down to maintenance, which is in the far east basement. So you walk all the way down there, and invariably I'd pick up the phone and I'd say, hi, this is Jason. And the voice on the other end, it'd usually be some gentleman saying, hey, I'm going to be painting my porch, and I understand you guys use a certain blue to keep the birds away, and I'd like to mimic that if you don't mind giving me the formula. And I would tell these folks, to save them the hassle and the money and perhaps the embarrassment when it doesn't work, that, that's not why we paint it blue. And invariably, these guys would argue with me. Oh, no, I heard it on a carriage tour. Oh, no, I was told. I know, I read it on the internet. And after the fourth or fifth time of me trying to help people into not doing this just for birds. I mean, if you want to do it for aesthetic reasons, have at it. It does look nice, and it gives a nice little glow when the light's hitting it in a certain time of day. But you would think they would say, "Oh, really? Hey, thanks a lot." No. These folks want to argue with the guy who actually puts it on, and so after about the fourth or fifth time, I'd pick up the phone. I'd say, "Hello, this is Jason," and the guy would say, "Listen, I'm thinking about painting my ceiling. The color's Dukiss. The color is Dukiss, Dewkiss from Pittsburgh Paint, and it's flat. Thank you. Have a great day. Good luck with your project." So I guess you could say I'm partially responsible for the pervasive use of folks who have visited the island, saw that blue ceiling on the porch, and then took the same thing home with them. So sorry about that, everybody. I just got tired of arguing. So Okay, folks, we've got a great treat for you now. We're having our first ever guest on the podcast. As you may have heard me say in previous podcasts, Mackinac Island is an actual working town. All the same municipal services you would see in any small town, and that includes a police department. Joining me today on the podcast is our current chief of police, Doug Topolski. Chief, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. I hope you're able to glean a little bit from our discussions we've been having.
Well, I've been listening, and I didn't realize about the blue paint at the Grand. I thought it was to keep the haints away.
Oh, right. The Jefferson Blue, the Dukiss. Yeah, as a matter of fact, anyone who wants to check my math on that, if you'll just take a glance at Somewhere in Time, which was released in 1980, by God, you'd see that ceiling was white then. So anyway, Chief, can you give us a history / background? How did you end up the chief of police on Mackinac Island? Take us through your career, if you would.
Sure. I joined the Detroit Police Department back in 1986 when I was 20 years old. I basically wanted to get out of the house while I still knew everything. And I worked there for 4 years, and then I went to the Dearborn Police Department, where I retired after 26 years as a lieutenant in Detective Bureau. And then I moved up to Manistee, and I worked a summer driving boats for Sheriff Kim Cole on Lake Michigan. And, I was a little bored. I went back to school. I took a job at the University of Michigan as a police officer, and I finished my bachelor's degree and started on my master's. And to be honest, I really didn't enjoy working there that much in the higher education environment. So the job on Mackinac Island came open, and I wanted to try something different that was still in Michigan, so here I am.
Oh, cool. Very cool. So, Chief, I'm sure you get this question a lot. What is the difference in a day at the MIPD in July versus a day at the MIPD in January?
Well, in the wintertime, our service that we provide most is transportation for people that can't get around either because there's no snow or because of age or infirmity. And also, we're required to escort a lot of the construction vehicles that come over. I don't know that most people know that all of the construction on Mackinac Island takes place during the winter. So we escort the vehicles so they don't cause any trouble with kids going to school or, other pedestrians. And, the population is way down in the winter, but we do get contractors here, as you know, all winter long. So that's how we expend most of our resources during the winter. In the summertime, same thing as any other resort type location. We provide a lot of police presence downtown, and we also administer and police the e-bike situation, which, as you know, is grown over here. So e-bike issues take up a lot of our time in the summer, as well as just providing a police presence downtown.
Right. Certainly, Chief, we sometimes are on the same frequency, fire and police, and I know you get a lot of lost child calls that usually end in about 5 to 10 minutes with unification with their parents. After all these years, have we ever not found a missing kid on Mackinac Island?
Nope, we never lost a child or an adult. We found them all.
Okay. What's your favorite part of the job, not just in law enforcement, but being the chief here on Mackinac Island?
I think it's the same as my other law enforcement jobs, and that would be meeting interesting people and hearing their stories. For example, here on the island, we've got everyone from literally billionaires to the working class, and everybody's got a story. I know you've mentioned Dale before Gallagher, who's former chief, and he's just a fascinating guy. At his age, he's still working every day. What is he, about almost 90?
No, I think he's 91 or 92 now.
Wow. And, one of my first or second summer here, he came down to register his e-bike, and I wasn't quite sure who he was, but, he introduced himself, and he's since transitioned to a mobility type card, although he's still working. But when he came to see me the first time, he had an e-bike that was something out of World War II. It was just ancient. And it didn't quite fit any of the classes we had, but, I gave him an e-bike permit, and somebody saw him riding around and asked me, how come, he gets an e-bike permit for that thing? And I told him, well, Dale's leg was blown up in Korea fighting communists. If you can tell me that, you can have one. So, it's just, people like that, hearing their stories, what brought them here to the island, whether they grew up here or moved here, or even seasonal residents. I enjoy talking to a lot of the seasonal, international workers on the work visas here, whether it's the Jamaicans or Eastern European people. I made friends with people from Transylvania. I asked them if they'd ever been to Dracula's Castle. They said, of course, everyone's been to Dracula's Castle.
That's great. We're hopeful to get Dale on the show
Good.
sooner than later.
Great.
He's a great guy. Stories to tell.
I bet.
It'd be about a 6-hour podcast, I think, just to scrape the beginning.
Yep.
A central theme folks are probably going to pick up on the folks that live on the island is it's the people.
Right.
So many people are going to come on this podcast and tell you they just really like the people.
Right.
What challenges do you face that maybe majority of other police departments don't face?
I think the biggest challenge, and it's got to do with just the nature of the island, is finding people who are a good fit to work here. And as you probably know, there's a hiring crisis right now in law enforcement. I don't know about the fire service,
emergency services across the board. Yeah.
So it was getting like that before I retired out of Dearborn. I was involved in the hiring process there, and that was pre-COVID. And now post-COVID, it's it's very, very difficult to get qualified applicants. And on the island, it's even it's compounded by the remote location, the desire to live maybe in housing that you don't own. It works better for single people, but we were lucky to get Mike Gruitz here with his kids.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of getting out there. Social media has been a great benefit in recruiting because it gets really gets the word out there. And we look for anyone from new recruits out of the academy who can find a job anywhere now. I mean, it's just so easy to get a job, all the way up to retirees who are still able to work, and for our seasonals. But we've been very fortunate. We just hired Officer Mijanowski from Clare County, and the council was gracious enough to allow us to hire him full time. So now it's a situation where when you find someone that fits, you kind of got to grab them.
Sure. And Midge is a great guy. Shout out to Midge.
Yeah.
I'm sure when you're traveling, you must get a lot of raised eyebrows when folks hear where you're from or where you work, and maybe some ribbon about being the chief of police on Mackinac Island. What is your favorite story or maybe anecdote you like to tell about your job here?
Wow, there's so many. I mean, it's a unique environment, which is what I was looking for. And we get the Mayberry jokes. Do you carry? As a lot of people know, I still carry here on the island my .45 Smith & Wesson revolver. So the old timers love that, and the retired cops. But I get the Mayberry jokes, and one of my favorite stories though is, my former coworkers asked me what's going on up here, and I'm not going to say their name, but there's some pretty well-off people up here, and they take us out on their 70-some foot motor yacht. And I say, well, I'm just on so-and-so is a well-known name, motor yacht, and Mrs. Smith is cooking us a turkey on the boat, and so gets them a little jealous. So just the wonderful people out here. I don't know if I should tell you the story about the roofers. You remember that one? Should we pass?
Go ahead, because
okay,
I think I might segue from that story into the last time we saw a service revolver pulled.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
So when I first got here, I think I was here for 2 weeks, and I hadn't even met all the officers yet, and I went down to the Mustang, which, as you know, is the only place open. And I walked in, and there was a kerfuffle starting between locals and a rough and ready roofing crew that was here. And so regardless of how the fight started, it started. And we were able to get everybody outside and kind of separated, and I was in the middle. And convinced the roofers to go home except for a lone holdout who pulled a claw hammer in the middle of the street. And I'm in plain clothes, and, well, I'm not going to get hit with a claw hammer, so I pulled my pistol on him. And, there was alcohol flowing, and they decided discretion was a better part of valor, and they left. And we went to their hotel to, finish our report, and they wanted to know who I was. I said, well, I'm the chief of police. And they said, well, what's your badge number? And I said, well, I don't have a badge number. He said, well, you have to have a badge number. That's the law. And so we've got the roofers quoting me the law, and I tossed them my chief's badge, and I said, what's the number on there? And he said, well, I guess there is no number. And, we started talking, and they were from Detroit, and I told them I used to work for Detroit, and I didn't survive my time there by not pulling my gun when somebody pulled a claw hammer on me on Verner Highway. Oh, you're from Detroit, and their tune kind of changed a little bit. So I was wondering, what did I get myself into here? But that was the only time. That was. Gosh, going on 4 years ago now.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. That story went around like wildfire.
That's another one of my favorite island stories. This is kind of like an everyday thing in Detroit or Dearborn or wherever down there, but up here it's kind of unique because I was talking to somebody who spends the winters in Florida after they came back, and somebody mentioned it, and he said, "Yeah, I heard that story the next day in Florida." So I'm like, "Geez."
That reminds me, and folks, we always said we're going to tell stories and old-time stuff here. Now, let me, speaking of a police officer pulling their weapon, let me tell this story. Now, I wasn't there. I don't even know if I was born yet. It was in the early 1970s. The chief of police at the time was a guy by the name of Otto Wandry. And the best way most people describe Otto Wandry was he was a big SOB. In fact, when he was riding a horse, he looked like Mongo riding the cow in blazing saddles coming down the street. I've seen the pictures, of course. Otto was retired from the Detroit Fire Department. He had decorated several times. He'd been in some real bad situations. He also was, I believe he was sunk in the Pacific in World War II. So, yeah, quite a guy. Anyway, a bachelor party had come to the island, and they were whooping it up, and they were tearing up the bars, and they were out of line and out of control. And the local police officer went down to kind of bring some peace, and they ended up beating him up unconscious. And I don't know if Margaret was the mayor then or Bud Emmons, but anyway, they called Otto down. They said, "You better get down here. Your deputy's unconscious." So Otto had to, put his gun belt on at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. It's not what he wanted to do. He comes marching down to town, and he accosts these gentlemen down by the Starline dock, where it is now. And apparently, again, I wasn't here. This is Mackinac lore, but I like it, and nobody's ever disputed it. Apparently, they were going to surround Otto, and they said, "Your deputy's laying there unconscious. What are you going to do?" And Otto pulled his pistol out, fired one shot into the sidewalk, bang! And he said, "That's the last one I'm wasting. Get on your boat and get out of here."
That'll do it.
And problem solved on the spot.
Yep.
So I think you and Otto are at least the only two stories I know. And
is Otto's son Paul?
Yeah, Paul.
So Paul's got a couple of brothers that are Detroit police officers, right? Yeah. And they were pretty well known. I found newspaper articles on them, detective stuff, and I've actually met one of his brothers up here.
Yeah. The Wandries are pretty well known in Detroit police and fire. Mm-hmm. But so anyway, you took a gun to a hammer fight. Good for you,
yeah,
Chief.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I got to dig you a little bit here, Chief. I see the emblem on the MIPD logo has a horse, dead center. I mean, it's the focal point of the seal of your crest, Chief.
Yep.
When is the last time you were on a horse?
Well, I think the badge has a canoe on it. I haven't been in a canoe lately either, but a horse, probably 30 years ago when I still lived in Detroit, we had the Detroit Mounted Stables were right by my house on Joy Road. And after Detroit PD moved out, the Buffalo Soldiers reenactment group moved in there. So I stopped by there once with my daughter, I believe, or by myself maybe, and they let me ride a horse around up there. So that was the last time.
That's a long way of saying, long about way of saying you don't ride horses, Chief.
I was offered free horse riding lessons at the Equestrian Center here, and I might do it this summer. But the ground looks a lot farther away when you're sitting up there.
That's true.
At my age, I can't afford to be falling off of horses.
Chief, I haven't been on a horse since 1981.
Oh, well, I might try it. We'll see this summer.
I'll be standing by. Hey, a question for you, because I'm sure a lot of your compadres down south would like to know this. Have you ever met any famous people on the job here on the island, or at least famous to you?
Famous to me, the most famous person I think I've met was Paul Keller, bass player, jazz guy from Detroit. And I'm sure there's been more famous people, but I'm sure they're incognito when they come up here. But I was walking down the street, and I used to love to hear Paul and his group play in Detroit. And there's Paul getting off the boat. I said, "Oh my gosh, it's Paul Keller." He said, "Well, how did you know me?" I said, "I see you in Detroit all the time." So he was up here to play at the Grand at the Jockey Club. He comes up twice a year for the Jazz Festival, and so it was great to see him.
Oh, cool. Not who I would have expected you would have said, but like I said, famous to you, Chief. I'm gonna pry you a little bit here too. You talked about Paul Keller, but I think. You held back. I believe you met your all-time crush up here.
That's right.
Your favorite Bond girl. Tell us about it.
Jane Seymour. I guess she comes up every 3 years or so for a Somewhere in Time weekend. And so I was able to meet Ms. Seymour and get a picture of her and picture with her, actually. And she's quite lovely. And I've got her picture framed in a Mackinac Island Grand Hotel frame that a friend of mine from downstate sent me. So I've got a framed picture of her and Jack Webb as Joe Friday on my file cabinet in the office. And I tell the youngsters that come in that that's my mom and dad, and they believe me. Yeah, that's how old we are. Hey, I got a celebrity voicemail message for our voicemail. Want to hear it?
Sure.
All right, and I will tell you, whoever can identify this celebrity voicemail reader, I will send them the first one that identifies them. I'll send them a Mackinac Island Police horse patch. And let's see, someone's going to recognize them pretty quick, I think. Let me pull it up right here.
But on the horse patch will not be a picture of you riding that
No,
horse.
not this one. Okay, here we go.
Hello. You've reached the Mackinac Island Police Department. If you have an emergency, dial 911. We are not able to take your call right now, but if you leave your name, number, and a brief message, someone will return your call as soon as possible.
Now, don't call the police department to hear that again, because I don't have it up in the voicemail yet. With our new phones, I haven't figured it out. But whichever one of your listeners can identify that celebrity voice, I will send them one of our patches.
Sounds good to me, Chief. I'm stumped. Last question for you, Chief. Who is on Facebook more, the police chief or the fire chief on Mackinac Island?
Oh gosh, I don't keep stats, but I think between you and I, we probably run up the city's bandwidth bill. I'm on there quite a bit, because we're all about people up here, and people seem to like it. I go to the association meetings, and they have an idea what's going on with the police department, and that's another fun part of the job.
Hey, thanks for being here.
Well, I appreciate it.
I know you're a busy guy, and I was able to carve out some time from you, and I appreciate that. And,
Absolutely.
And folks listening, thanks again for coming along on the podcast. We want to once again thank our sponsor, the Mackinac Island Tourism Bureau. Your trip begins at MackinacIsland.org. I'm Jason St. Ange, and this has been the Mackinac Island Moments Podcast. Good day.